Hi, it's Vivian here again. So I've been inactive for a while because I was on break and internet connection was not exactly in my favor, but I'm back now. And just to kick off an exciting new year, today we're going to talk about the most depressing poet in Chinese history. So I mentioned poet Qu Yuan in one of my previous videos. He was alive from 4th to 3rd century BC and has been considered one of China's greatest poets since. What do you mean one of? He's the greatest, period. Before we get to know the guy, we should first take a look at what China was like back then. Qu Yuan was born into the end of the Warring States era, which lasted from mid-5th century to the year 221 BC. The period was called the Warring States due to the frequent conflicts between the many states ruled by different families. There was a central government, the East Qin Dynasty, but it was largely a figurehead because each state ruled independently and they each had distinct laws and cultures. And by the end of this period, the state of Qin, thanks to its military power, began to invade other states and eventually united China and founded the Qin Dynasty, which is considered by historians to be the very first imperial dynasty of China. But so much about the big picture. Qu Yuan was from the state of Chu, which you might have noticed was not the state that ruled China in the end. To put it very briefly, Qu Yuan was alive just in time to watch his homeland fall apart and eventually succumbing to another ruler. Exciting, yeah? Many people throughout the history of mankind have had the misfortune of watching their nations collapse. Qu Yuan, however, was a little bit different. Not only was he a distant relative of the ruling family of Chu, he also worked for the king. His exact position in the government was unclear because apparently historians have very divided opinions. Historians never agree on anything. But one thing was relatively clear. King Huai of Chu worked very closely with him in a number of domestic and interstate affairs. These were likely the best years of Qu Yuan's life, when the king trusted him and he had the chance to work for the country he loved so much. And then things began to go downhill. According to Shi Ji, written by Sima Qian, what killed Qu Yuan's political career was jealousy. Apparently, other government officials thought the king should spread the love around rather than giving it all to Qu Yuan. So they talked behind his back and the king began to distance himself from Qu Yuan. Thus began Qu Yuan's first exile. Shortly after he returned to the capital, the king whom he admired and worshipped so much was taken hostage by the state of Qin over a territory dispute and later died there. Qu Yuan then briefly worked for the king's successor but ended up with a second exile, also resulting from, wait for it, jealousy. Basically, a lot of people didn't like having him around. But the reality was, the state of Chu could not be saved, whether Qu Yuan was on exile or not. After numerous failed attempts to make peace with the warlords of Qin, the Chu capital fell. Qu Yuan's most renowned poem, Li Sao, which literally means suffering from agony, is a record of his emotions. He was heartbroken for many reasons. The king stopped trusting him, he was surrounded by scumbags, people don't seem to value beauty anymore, etc., etc., etc. A recurring question in his poem sums it all up. If the world is such a dirty mess, why am I still holding on to my virtues? Qu Yuan firmly believed that he was the last sober man standing. He wanted to lead the way and help the state move forward, but all attempts failed because other people weren't like him. And the saddest thing he described in his poems is watching the deprivation of what had once been beautiful. Qu Yuan's poems are among the least comprehensible writings in Chinese history as well as the most studied. A lot of people find his poems difficult or even pretentious because he very frequently used plants as a metaphor. Fragrant plants such as orchid and magnolia stand for virtue, and weed meant evil. In Li Sao, even after the most fantastic imaginary adventures with gods, Qu Yuan still couldn't get over the fact that his beloved flowers decayed into smelly weeds. Qu Yuan was obsessed with beauty and virtue and perfection, but all he could do in reality was watch everything he held so close to his heart shatter into pieces. The epilogue of Lisa goes as follows. Forget it. No wise man in this state understands me. Why should I still yearn for my homeland? Not one person is worth pursuing an ideal world for, and I shall find myself in God's underwater dwelling. By saying that he would go to a God's underwater palace, Qu Yuan meant it literally. Around the year 278 BC, knowing that he could never save his homeland from the ruins of corruption and defeat, Qu Yuan threw himself into the river of Miluo. Ever since Qu Yuan's death, we have set aside a day each year, the day of his suicide, to remember this man. So up to this day, the Dragon Boat Festival, also known as Duan, which falls on the 5th of May on the lunar calendar, is a national holiday. He's the only historical figure in China to have that kind of privilege, to have our undivided attention like that. We don't even have a national holiday for Confucius. Why don't we get a day off on Confucius' birthday? I demand a national holiday for every great Chinese poet and philosopher. Wait, that would take away the whole year, wouldn't it? Two of the most practiced costumes of Duanwu are dragon boat races and eating zongzi, which is basically a sticky rice wrap, both of which are said have derived from Qu Yuan's drowning. Folklores have it that after Qu Yuan committed suicide, the local people sailed onto the river and threw bamboo tubes filled with rice into the water, just so the fish would eat the rice instead of Qu Yuan's lifeless body. So the boating later turned into dragon boat races, and the bamboo tubes with rice later turned into what we now know as zongzi. Qu Yuan might not be loved by his king or colleagues, but he was loved by the people, because we too, like Qu Yuan, cannot bear seeing beauty shattered into pieces. Qu Yuan, in a way, was beauty itself, and to see a good man like him finding no other way but to take his own life like that is depressing. Modern scholars call him a romanticist, which is not exactly appropriate because romanticism was not a thing until the 18th century and is from Europe. We don't need to give Qu Yuan any title to make him significant. He is who he is. Idealistic, stubborn, sad, naive, a bit narcissistic, probably, and irreplaceable. In the next episode, I will focus on a problem that has regained public attention in recent years, and that is Qu Yuan's sexual orientation. I'll see you next time.